so I'll just set that going. The slides will be available to everybody later. There'll be a Q&A opportunity at the end, and also with a brief Q&A after each segment, time permitting. We may not have all the answers today, but we will take any essential unanswered questions back to the FA. For your action today, please mute and turn your cameras off. This will just help to speed up the webinar proceedings and hopefully speed up the slides so there's less of a lag. So Tony, if you could just turn your screen off, thanks. Any questions or add comments, please via the chat. You can also use the hands up function. The speaker will invite you to unmute and ask your question. Thanks, Tony. We want your feedback to help shape the safe return of football, so please do get involved. Any questions and any comments, do feel free to add them in. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to have an overview of the return to football guidance with customer service updates from Paul Bickerton. Then we've got a practical application and considerations for returning to grassroots football with our guest speaker, Michael Cole of Hackney Marshes Youth League. Then we've got a County Cups update from Jamal Horn. We've got a coach education update with Paul Bickerton again. And then lastly, we've got safeguarding responsibilities in open age teams with Jake Rosewell, one of our safeguarding officers. And I believe Nikita Patel is also on the webinar. She'll be answering some questions as well as you put them into the chat. Then at the end, we'll have an open Q&A for everybody to pick up any questions that remain outstanding from the course of the webinar. Okay, so I'll now hand over to Paul Bickerton, our CEO, who's going to take us through the most recent FA guidance and our customer service updates. Thanks, Paul.
Lovely. Thank you, Amanda. Just to check, Amanda, you can hear me okay, so the sound's working?
Yeah, I can hear you, thanks.
Very good. Okay, good evening, everyone. So thanks, everybody, for joining. We really appreciate your time. And I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to give you a summary of the return to football guidance that's come out over the last couple of weeks, quite extensive. So I'm going to summarise that for you. I'll finish with a couple of updates about how we're managing our customer service as we get back into the restart of the game. I mean, the first thing to say, we last ran these league webinars a couple of months ago. And as we were talking, the burning question really was, look, when is grassroots football going to be allowed to be back up and running? And at the time, the prognosis felt fairly glum. I have to be honest, the social distancing guidelines didn't seem to be going anywhere, and we were pretty nervous about a really seriously interrupted season. I do think our colleagues at the FA have worked really well with government to convince them that football's really important to come back, that we can do that safely. So I think we're in a really positive position here, much more positive than I thought we potentially would be a couple of months ago. Now, it is going to be challenging. There's a lot of guidance. It's very different. It looks and feels different, and it's going to be difficult to deliver. And it's a major learning curve for all of us. We're going to have to feel our way here. But we are really encouraged that we can see a start to the game as we hoped we would. So if you just click onto the next slide, if that's okay, Amanda. And essentially this slide just summarises the guidance that's out there and it's available. It's not an exhaustive list, but this is essentially the FA guidance. It's split between, I guess, quite general guidance for everybody in the game and some very specific pieces of guidance. The general guidance, quite extensive, it's about 17, 18 pages. It includes the code of conduct for players and some very specific safeguarding guidance. And to make life a little bit easier for everybody, there's a one-page summary and then a set of FAQs that follow that. Now, following on from that generic guidance is some very specific documentation. So one of those is around a risk assessment guidance and template. It's a really important part of these whole safety measures. Some very specific first aid guidance, that's quite technical. Some specific guidance for facility providers, mostly relevant for organisations that own and run venues and pitches. That does include a number of clubs. And then for the more elite side of the game, so the National League and the women's football, so in the pyramids tiers 3 to 6, there's some very specific guidance there. Very recently, literally a few days ago, we've also just had some very specific guidance on referees, so both for grassroots football and for the National League system. And again, there's a one-page summary for referees. The final bit of guidance that I'm just highlighting here It isn't an FA produced bit of guidance, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because a lot of the questions that we've been getting over the last couple of weeks have been around, quite understandably, what are our duties of care, what's our liability, what are our legal risks here, and there's some very good guidance that covers that. So I'm just going to say a few things on that in a couple of slides' time. So that's an overview of the guidance. If you just click on to the next slide, Amanda. So that's the one pager. Now you'll see that one of the really important things that I think leagues in particular can do, I mean everybody in the game will, but in particular leagues, is to communicate this information out to your stakeholders. And this is a really handy one pager that can be put on websites, that can be sent out over social media. I mean, clubs, we would definitely encourage them to put them up in their clubhouses to make everybody who's coming to a game and involved in a game aware of all of that. So I think that one pager summarises really nicely essentially the guidance that the FA have produced. Just to highlight some of the points in there, some of the really important points in there, if you just move on to the next slide, Amanda, if that's okay. Lovely. So it's split into 3 sections. So what do you do before you come to a game? What do you do during the game? And what do you do after the game? Now, there's some really important measures to put in place before the game itself. And the first of these is essentially a set of self-checks for people about whether they may have symptoms or not. It feels really obvious, but it is an important step here. Now, the guidance is clear that people need to take their own responsibility for that. They should be doing what they call a self-screen. Some clubs are going a little bit further. They're actually screening people on arrival. There's a very simple checklist as they go through. As they take a register, they do a bit of a symptom check there to be very prudent. That's great, but it's primarily for the individual to do that. Now, a couple of the big changes that are set out in the guidance. The first is the appointment of a COVID-19 officer who's essentially going to oversee these changes and lead them. And a really important part of what that COVID-19 officer will do is the completion of a risk assessment. And that isn't a general risk assessment, that is a really specific COVID-19 risk assessment. And in the guidance, there's a really clear template, and we'd encourage everybody to follow that template carefully. It's really helpful. It really takes you through the various sections and the things that you need to be thinking about. The other really important bit is ensuring that clubs are all complying with track and trace guidelines. Now, that's relatively simple. It's about having access to the contact details and knowing everybody who is at a particular fixture. That's really key. Now, for a lot of clubs, they already have the contact details of individuals, but those do change training session to training session, match to match. So they will need to keep, even if they've got the contact details, a really simple record of, you know, the players and the people involved in that fixture or in that training session. If you're running a fixture, you know, the home team would look after its home team, the away team would look after its contacts for its away team, but essentially the home team's probably the one most likely to be contacted by Public Health England, so it would need to at least pass on a contact of the away team so that they can get the information there. The way it works, you'll probably have seen lots of this. There's very clear guidance on the government website, but essentially if somebody does test positive for COVID, then they're asked to supply to Public Health England a whole rate of their various contacts and who they've been in touch with over the past week. So it is possible as a club, or if you're running a meeting or something like that, you may get contacted by Public Health England to say, this individual's tested positive, who else have they been in contact with, and we need to speak to them and essentially ask them to self-isolate. So that's essentially the track and trace process, and it is about just understanding and knowing who's at a particular session or fixture. In terms of during, I mean, there's lots of guidance around this, but the basic premise is that it's social distancing at every point apart from competitive match play when you're actually on the pitch. playing competitively. Now that includes things like the discussions that you have with the referee, some of the things the referee's been asked to do, like speed up set plays. Those are the type of things that are limiting social distancing on the pitch. Of course, there's loads of opportunities around the game for people to come into very close contact, and that needs to be managed carefully. There's also in the guidance a really clear code of behaviour for participants, and it's really important that players understand that and recognise that. Again, a lot of it is quite common sense, but important that people are aware of that. It's the type of thing, again, to put on websites and communicate to people. Little bit less information in terms of after the game. Fundamentally, it is about being really careful around social distancing and thinking really carefully about some of the transmission. So changing rooms are clearly a really obvious place where there can be significant transmission. And if you look at the DCMS website, it's interesting. It talks about droplet transmission. That's how this virus is transferred to people. And things like changing rooms are very, very prevalent there. So the really strong advice is to avoid changing rooms wherever you can. Players arrive, change, they leave, they wash their own kit, etc. Now, there are some circumstances for certain needs that people have, for safeguarding reasons where changing rooms may be required. That's allowed, but on the whole, that is a risky environment for people to be in. So the advice is to try and avoid that wherever possible. If you just click on a couple of other bits, Amanda, it just brings a couple of other points up on the slide. Great stuff. So all of this is surrounded, and you'll see this in all of the guidance documents, it's surrounded by lots of information about personal hygiene measures, about traffic flow across sites, about the importance of regular communications, and all underpinned, like all of our work always is, underpinned by really strong safeguarding measures. Now, the key with the safeguarding measures is that in certain instances and in relation to the virus, these at times need to be adapted. And you'll see in the guidance there's quite a bit of reference to where specific safeguarding measures need to be considered, and that's included in all of the documentation. Okay, good stuff. Just click onto the next slide, Amanda. Lovely. So what you have here is the document that I referred to, which is about legal risks and duties of care. Now, it's developed by Sport England along with a law firm that they use, Sheridan's, who I've worked with, who are excellent. And they have come up with this guidance around things like duties of care and legal risks. And it's a major point of contention. I think we want providers like yourselves, like clubs, like other stakeholders, to feel confident reopening and getting football going. And understandably, some of the questions are, well, what happens if there is somebody who contracts the virus at one of our sessions or at one of our games, and God forbid they get extremely ill or they die? What might be the repercussions? And actually, have we done everything we possibly can to make that safe, both from a moral point of view, but also from a legal point of view? Now, the guidance, again, is quite extensive. Some of it's quite technical, it's quite legal, as you'd expect, but the basic premise is as follows. So if you're a provider, whether that's a league, whether it's a club, this is very relevant in particular to clubs who are essentially responsible for the running of the individual fixtures. They've got to demonstrate the following three things. So they've taken all reasonable steps to follow government and public health authority guidance, and that's all available. That they've taken all reasonable steps to follow their national governing body guidance. In this instance, it would be the Football Association guidance that I'm taking you through, and the evidence that they've carried out a full and proper COVID-19 assessment. If you do those three things, you're in a very strong position. And certainly from a legal point of view, the lawyers tend to look at the difference between what's reasonable and what is reckless, and where people clearly haven't followed guidance or have done certain things that should very obviously have been picked up. There's a risk that you get accused of being reckless, and that's where there's a little bit of danger. But provided you follow these steps and you take these reasonable steps, then you're in a very strong position. Now, we've been engaging with our own insurance provider, which is SportsGuard. The majority of our clubs use that insurance, and SportsGuard have come back to us and confirmed that as long as organisations are taking these steps, then they think in the unlikely event that there'd be a claim, and they think that's very unlikely, then they think they'd be in a really strong position to defend that. So people can feel confident to go out and to get things up and running, but do follow the guidance and do take those steps. That's all available on the Sporting England website. You can see the link there, and actually that page and the coronavirus help on the Sporting England website is really good. I'd really urge people to take a bit of time to read through it all. There's lots of very good kind of information on there. Good stuff. I think that covers everything on the summary of the guidance side. So I'll just move quickly on to just some of our customer service arrangements so you all understand that, and then we'll take a few questions. So we've made quite a few changes to our customer service just over the period of lockdown, and I'm just going to talk you through those changes. And those changes, really at the heart of them, is about modernising our customer service. I think the way that we were managing it previously was quite old-fashioned. This is about really modernising how we deliver our customer service and ultimately providing a better service to our customers. So the first thing is the website and the audit and rebuild of that website. A lot of work's gone into that. That's essentially the front-facing communication mechanism for us. I hope you've seen that over the last couple of months, we've used that website extensively to communicate a lot of these changes and to get the right levels of information out to people as we get into the restart of the game. Couple of things to point you to specifically on there. We've got a support portal which is built through our email management system, but it's essentially a set of FAQs, quite extensive, all split into different sections. And a lot of the queries that we get in regularly, 70% of them are relatively straightforward and get asked regularly. You can get onto the website and you can find that solution yourself. That's much quicker and much less frustrating than having to wait on a phone or having to send an email. So we'd urge customers definitely to start by going through that portal and see if there's some guidance that can help them solve that solution there. The other area to point you to, keep an eye on that grassroots football latest. That's front and centre of our website. Anytime any government advice changes, it immediately gets posted on that website, normally within a 24-hour period, quite often a lot sooner than that. We've got a communications agency in Porto that manage that for us very well. So keep an eye on that section of the website. All the latest information is there. We've also made a shift from a phone operating system to an email management system. So some of the complaints from customers, quite understandably, were spend a while trying to get through to you. When we get through to you, we ask a question, the message gets passed on, it kind of disappears. We don't quite know where it goes. It's very difficult to track. The same happens at our end. It's really difficult to pick up and track some of that stuff. The email management system is completely different. It's built on a platform called Freshdesk. It allows us to log and track every single query. Customers get a number. They're able to report that back to us. We're able to see the thread of the communication, and we're able to resolve queries much more efficiently and quickly. We're also, of course, able to monitor how those response rates are going. We're able to see where we are responding quickly and where we aren't. There's even a customer service function there, which is a bit of a questionnaire at the end. Very quick, it takes 2 minutes. How did we do? Were you happy with the service? Weren't you? It would be great to get more and more people doing that questionnaire so that we get some feedback. It's already coming in, but we'd like to get a little bit more of that feedback through that system. So I'd urge people to go through that if you can. We do still have the phone system up and running, but the email management system is much more effective, and I think you'll get a lot more joy going through that approach. The final thing we've done, which I really think has been quite an eye-opener, certainly for me, through lockdown, is just the power of communication. So we've done a lot through social media. Lots of things regularly go out through our channels there. We've put together a fortnightly newsletter that goes out to all of our members. That's combined with all of the updates on the website, and that's had a major impact, I think, on keeping people informed and managing some of the traffic of queries back into the organisation. The other thing that's been really interesting is some of these webinars. So we held a clubs webinar yesterday with exactly the same information. We've had 2 leagues webinars over the last couple of days. Much better attendance than I think if we'd run those as physical meetings and sessions. And of course, there's a really obvious reason for that, is you're in your house and you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to travel halfway across London. You don't have to take up an entire evening, and you don't have to spend a load of money on public transport. So I really think that some of these webinars are something that we're going to be looking to do quite a bit more regularly, and they've proved to be a really useful communication tool. So that's it from me, Amanda. So that covers customer service changes, just an overview of the guidance. If anyone's got any questions, so you've got the chat function, or do put your hand up. I'm really happy to take any of those now.
No questions so far in the chat.
No problem at all. I won't take that personally. And if anybody thinks of anything as we go through the webinar, then just ping it on the chat and I'll be able to answer, or we'll bring it up at the end if that's okay.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Okay, moving on. We'll move on to some of the practical applications of the guidance in getting football started. So as you'll all be aware, leagues have very differing circumstances and setups. So today's guest speaker, Michael Cole, will discuss some of the changes that they're implementing at Hackney Marshes to increase safety and reduce the risk of COVID transmission in order to get their member clubs back playing as safely as possible. As well as providing some good practice examples, this discussion will serve as much to highlight the challenges that are still faced by leagues and clubs for this safe return to football. So we're also hoping that this and future forums will help to increase dialogue and best practice sharing between leagues to collectively find more and better solutions. So I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Cole. Are you there, Michael?
I am, Amanda.
Okay, I'll leave it to you then, Michael. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, as Amanda mentioned, I am responsible for the Hackney Marshes Saturday Youth Football League. I'm the Football Development Officer for the Borough of Hackney, and one of our biggest programmes that we deliver is this Hackney Marshes Saturday Youth Football League. So, if you can skip on to the next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so the league, it's made up of 55 member clubs, in excess of 180 teams for under 8s to under 17s, 18 divisions, and we have over 2,000 players registered to play. Next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so what does restart mean to us at the Hackney Marshes Saturday Youth Football League? So we're kind of really intent on putting together an inclusive plan that contains clear communication, mode of communication. What Paul alluded to there, we're finding the kind of way in which we communicate in this modern day via virtual means is proving quite a success. Obviously, for the reasons that Paul mentioned, not having to step outside your house and go halfway across London to meet up. So that's been quite fruitful. Multi-directional. With the Youth League, there's many different components of the Youth League that need to be overseen. Referees, clubs themselves, the venue, parents. Obviously, a Youth League, you have to have consent from parents. So information has to be multi-directional. Important to offer guidance and support. Of course, in these precarious times, there's going to be a lot of anxious people, clubs, parents, people that are volunteers within the actual scheme of things, that will need additional guidance and support. So that's what we intend to offer. And in regards to implementing the plan, we believe it has to be reasonable and obviously complies with the government guidance. That's quite important. But last but not least, practical, because once again, we're talking about a volunteer workforce. And for someone who's fully employed in the role that I am, some things might seem an easy fix, but for someone who's a volunteer, that might not just be practical. So we're really kind of conscious of the fact that we want to, ensure that the means that we implement are practical ones. Next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, stages of our plan. So, which is quite important. As a local authority, we want to make sure that we're taking the correct line in regards to what responsibilities lay with us to deliver the league. So we need to make sure we understand and establish the league's responsibilities. So our intent is to put in place a robust process that will outline and inform everybody that's involved with the league what our responsibilities will be to them, and ensure that that's taken on board there's clarity to that, because from conversations internally here with our head of insurance, there has to be an understanding of where that line is drawn, and the responsibility becomes that of the clubs, which is quite, kind of clear in the information that's been imparted by the London FA. But there's an assurance in play whereby we need to make sure that the clubs are on board with that. They do understand what it is that has been kind of moved their way. Production of information, that's something that we are once again trying to make clear. So risk assessments, they'll be available to be seen by the clubs if they wish to do so. So we as a local authority, we utilise the marshes, which is managed by GLL. And so we have to have some compliancy and some joint up thinking in regards to what we put in place as a risk assessment that falls in line with what GLL have as a risk assessment. And then on match day, once again, that's part of our responsibility to ensure and determine that the clubs are understood in regards to what will happen to them on a match day, and what measures will be up and running for them on a match day, clear guidance in regards to arrivals, match structures, interventions within games, which we will probably speak about in a future slide as well. Dissemination of the information and explanations as well. So sometimes you need that additional conversation, dialogue, to ensure that the information that has been imparted is understood. So we will put that in place, and that will take the shape of virtual meetings. And we explained the advantages of that already. And we have an SGM planned at the end of August, and also all those moving parts that I mentioned before, in the multi-directional way that we have to engage and communicate with different elements of the league. We'll have those conversations virtually with GLL and the referees as well. Next slide, please, Amanda. Right, so what our plan would include. So some of the things that we are looking to kind of go with this season and implement, that we will have a conversation with the clubs about the SGM, mentioning the fact, a pertinent fact about it being practical. So we need to know if some of the measures that we want to implement are practical. So first and foremost, we're looking at the kickoff times, something that they're kind of already kind of used to in the youth league anyway. They'll be staggered to reduce the actual footfall on a match day at one given time. But ultimately, we're looking at ways in which we can even saturate that number even more. Our league has a couple of divisions in each age groups predominantly. So within each of those age groups, they're given the red and the blue division names. So we're looking at a system whereby alternate weeks, each colour division will play. So blue 1 week, red off that week, and then red the alternate week playing. So obviously that will reduce the volume of traffic on one given Saturday. In order to do that, though, we will be suggesting to the clubs maybe we will go with one game in the season, not a kind of usual home and away fixture, because ultimately Hackney Marshes is the only venue that they use, being it centralised. So they are going to be playing there whether they're home or away. So yeah, we're going to have that kind of in mind when we speak to the clubs. The other thing we're looking at is a track and trace system, utilising the whole game system, whereby we have access to all the players who are registered with us to play in the games. We have their personal details. So we understand with the protocol that's set by the FA that each club will have a COVID-19 officer. Their responsibility is to relay information to their parents and participants and their members of their club. And if information does unfortunately arise where a member of their team shows signs of the COVID-19 virus, and that has to be reported into NHS. If NHS have to do their kind of due diligence and get in contact with clubs that have come into contact with that team and that player, then we'll have all that available on our whole game system and full-time system as well to impart. Other elements we're looking to maybe adopt within our responsibilities around the game are maybe throw-ins, whereby we have approached the FA to suggest that maybe we can look at youth football having, instead of throw-ins, having kick-ins. So that will bring about the reduction of hand to ball. And then other things that we have in mind are having intermittent breaks at given times throughout the fixtures, whereby the referee will blow the whistle, ultimately take the ball, and then the home side will be responsible for cleaning the ball at that given time during the half of the game. So that's something that complements the guidance that's been sent out in regards to sanitation of the equipment. Crowds, don't know if you can see that quite clearly, but that fourth picture is a kind of like a accumulation of people in a football crowd. So we're looking at the government guidance whereby there should be a reduction of spectators along the pitch side. So once again, we'll be discussing that with the clubs to try and ensure that they adopt the measures that have been sent out by government and FA guidance in regards to the number of people alongside the pitch on the touchline. Could be difficult in regards to young people and their parent support, whereby they need them to, kind of take them to the game. But it's something that we intend to put out there, so we get a response and get some feedback from clubs who know their kind of children, know their players, know their parents, their capability of, getting their players to games. So we can get some feedback on that and get a good kind of barometer on how we can implement that measure. Last but not least, car parking. Those of you that know Hackney Marshes, it is a big issue at the sites we use. We use the South Marsh, the North Marsh, and we also utilise Mabley Green. And on a Saturday match day and on a Sunday match day, because I've seen David Josephs is in the actual kind of meeting as well, so he can actually kind of confirm this. But parking at the Marshes is a big, not issue, but it is something that we appreciate. The actual kind of plethora of cars that turn up on a match day. So we have security staff on match days. So it might be a situation whereby clubs and teams are forewarned about the capacity of the car park could be reduced. And so that would comply with the idea of, social distance parking, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. But ultimately, it's just another measure whereby we can look to maybe saturate the volume of people and traffic in one given area. Okay, final slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so questions. I'm sure that's what's going to be coming our way. A lot of the actual kind of clubs in a normal world will have many questions anyway. So with the state of what we're experiencing now, then we will kind of expect a lot of questions. But what we hope to do is have practical answers, which is quite important for us, practical, reasonable and compliant answers. And we're quite thankful that most of the areas that need to be covered have already been covered by the London FA and government, with the actual information that Paul's already mentioned that's available to clubs, referees, venues as well. And one important element of what we intend to make our kind of contacts aware of is that we want to ensure that everything is consistent. And that's one of the things that many people are picking up in everyday life, the kind of ambiguity of what people perceive as what government processes and protocols are in regards to keeping safe, whether you be a pub or whether you be kind of in the leisure industry. There seems to be a few grey areas in which people are not quite sure still of what steps and measures should be adopted. So what we intend to do is to be quite consistent and, once again, reasonable, compliant and practical. That's it for me, Amanda.
That's great. Thank you very much, Michael. Really informative. Has anybody got any? Okay, let's have a look. There's a couple of comments. David Joseph's agreed with you on the car parking. I think that was mentioning. There's a question here from David, another David. He's enjoying your presentation, but would dare suggest your league is not typical of other large youth leagues in that all your games are central location. Yeah, we're very aware that centrally run leagues have different issues to non-centrally run leagues. So, and the rest of the comment is, in the respect that excellent actions being proposed are more akin to a larger scale version of what Anita was suggesting for home clubs yesterday. Yeah, I agree with that, but no less interesting for that. Yeah, I don't know, has somebody got David, would you like to unmute and just make any further comments about your non-centrally run league? Do you want to add anything? Are you there, David? Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, we'll move on. We had on the webinar yesterday, which is a non-central. Oh, he said no, mic not working. Okay, thanks, David. Anyway, yeah, we had Westford on the webinar yesterday, so I'll share their slides with you and just go over their points briefly. They're a non-central venue, so obviously have very different issues and challenges to a centrally run venue. So I'll go over some of those points with you. They've listed some changes that they've made or will make, and along with challenges that they still see as unresolved as yet. As you can see, this first slide is about some changes that they've implemented. The first one being that they've created a COVID awareness little handout that they're going to give to all of their member clubs along with the handbook that they give out. I've just copied a little screenshot of it there on the right for you, so you can have a little read of that. I won't go through everything, but this is something basically that the clubs are expected to share with their teams and have a little pre-match safety briefing, which includes the points on this. And it's just as a reminder, they feel it's necessary because from what they've seen from friendlies and people, you know, the adult game is a little bit different, that people perhaps just going straight back into it, not sort of being quite so concerned about any risks of this, transmission of COVID. So they just want all their clubs to have a briefing every week, couple of minutes before the match, just to remind everybody this is what you need to be doing, this is how you need to keep yourself and everyone else safe around you. They've also shared the central risk assessment with all their clubs. They have their own risk assessment in progress, it's not completed yet. The risk assessment that they're sharing with the clubs, they're not going to collect it back in and review them all, purely from a capacity point of view, and they're not expected to. The leagues are not expected to do that, but obviously as a league, if you wish to do that, you may, but you're not expected to, because depending on the size of your league, obviously that could be a very large task which you may not have the manpower for. They've made some league adaptations, so they're holding an SGM next Monday. That's with the intention to have a Q&A with their own clubs and a forum just basically for sharing best practice and getting people used to the changes that they need to implement for COVID safety. They're also going to look at the potential for extended kick-off times to allow more spread of matches. But again, as a non-central venue, they don't really have the influence on the venues to make the venues reduce capacity. So the likelihood is that the venues are not going to do that. So they're also planning for a full season of fixtures because they feel that's what the clubs want, but they do realise that they'll probably have to adapt this as time goes on, depending on unfulfilled fixtures or changes to lockdown restrictions, anything else, but they're aware that they may have to change this as time goes on. Okay, so to move on, this is some of the challenges that they still perceive as relevant. Their member clubs are spread across 70 venues. So they have 10 which are currently opening. They've got some more opening for the start of the season, but there are some other venues that are unable to open until October. So the league know that they need to bear that in mind and be a bit flexible regarding fixtures for clubs that may not have access to a venue at that time. They're very well aware that the risk assessments being carried out by the venues are widely varying in quality. Some are being completed and some are being not completed at all or to varying degrees, which they found already with the 10 that are open. You know, there was one venue that doesn't seem to have anything at all in place apart from that they've closed the indoor space. So that is something, again, that the league can't control or influence. Another thing is the referees' guidance. There's issues about sharing equipment, so it's been suggested that referees can, you know, obviously they bring the linesman's flags, so they should disinfect them before they give them to the people, the people from the teams running the line. If there's any changeover at half time, it should be disinfected at half time. Any other equipment shouldn't be shared during the match unless it can be disinfected. Lastly, they still see as a challenge as cash and match cards because they're not currently paperless, and they won't have time to implement that for the start of the season. There are ways, obviously, that they can pay referees, not by backs or other methods, but then that requires a little bit more work around when does the referee get paid and things like that. So that's the points from Westphal. I've also had some feedback from some other leagues. I'm aware that Southern Sunday have now gone 100% paperless, so if people are interested in looking at doing that themselves, Southern Sunday might be a good one to speak to about that. Also, another youth league, Regent's Park, have introduced no spitting and no shouting rules. They wanted to introduce that anyway, but they've used this as a sort of way to get that in. They're having digital info hubs instead of people gathering at the central part in their venue on a Saturday. They're doing all of that digitally now. And they're also suggesting a one-to-one player spectator ratio. So that would limit the group sizes, the spectator sizes, to 30, which complies with the government guidelines. So that's just a couple of other ideas. So let's have a look. That's it from Westphal. Let's have a look at the questions. Tony, what is the association's view and any different guidelines on day tournament events? So I'm not sure if Paul or Jamal want to pick that one up.
Last time I checked, tournaments and festivals are currently permitted.
Yeah, that's right. Jamal's right. So if you look at the FA guidance, they phased it. So they allowed up to the end of July competitive training. They've proposed a set of kind of competitive games, mainly friendlies, things like our county cup finals, and then things like kind of festivals and tournament events as a bit of a curtain raiser for the season for August, and then we're into the league season for September. So yeah, that's in the guidelines.
Okay. Paul, did you want to pick up that comment of David's at the very end?
I'll happily cover it now, Amanda, if that's okay. I think it saves me forgetting and it getting missed.
Yep.
So firstly, thanks enormously to Michael for that presentation, because that's a really interesting oversight from you, Michael, and some great work that you're doing down there. So really good to see that. I think, David, good question. So I think the first thing, just a point on the referees. So I think the FA quite rightly have said, look, the job of the referee is difficult enough without then adding and burdening a whole load of additional responsibilities that involve managing some of these COVID breaches outside of the game itself. So there are some amendments a little bit around things like the code of behaviour and what players do on the pitch that referees will have to manage. But broadly speaking, the FA have wanted to be really clear that it isn't the referee's responsibility to be policing all of the kind of the COVID requirements around the game. That would be a really tough job for them. So you're absolutely right that the referees have been asked to do that. And if you look at the one pager, it very specifically states that for referees. In terms of what the FA have asked us to advise the leagues on, so I think the first thing is, our experience of dealing with COVID breaches are really quite difficult, because often they're very minor breaches. Often it's because people are unaware or not quite thinking it through, rather than really maliciously kind of breaching the guidelines. And the advice, firstly, and what's very powerful, is actually, for a league, if it becomes aware of these breaches, to just flag it, probably quite politely, with the offending club or individual. And most of the time, just having that conversation with them actually has the desired effect. And I think that's the case more generally. I mean, my wife's a police officer and dealing with this every day, and 99% of the time she's telling me that when she just highlights to somebody that they might be breaching, it immediately changes the behaviour. So that's the most effective way. There are certain instances, and we've had that, where there have been really obvious willful breaches of the guidelines, and there's also been some quite solid evidence of that. For example, things being posted on social media about competitive games played when they weren't allowed. Now, in those cases, the league wrote to the clubs involved, kind of expressing their disappointment, and we were also able, and I don't know the exact kind of technical charge, but we were able to raise charges, I think, around bringing the game into disrepute. So if there's a really willful breach, if there's very strong evidence, I definitely encourage the league to report that to us as a county FA, and we can take action. So I hope that answers your question, David.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, so now we'll move on to Cups, and I'll hand over to Jamal, please.
Okay, hope everyone can hear me.
Yes,
okay,
thanks.
So just recently, the London FA Cups and Competitions Committee have approved for the remaining 12 cup finals that were outstanding before lockdown to be played, which is fantastic. We did a bit of a survey to all the clubs. All the clubs definitely stated that they wanted to play, and it's really, really great that myself and the senior management team at London FA and the Cups Committee are all on the same page and happy to host the remaining 12 matches. Of the remaining cup finals, as you can see on the screen, those have now been set with a date and venue, and those are the competing teams. You'll see 10 on the list. 10 dates and venues have been confirmed, and 11th has been confirmed, but only very recently. I'll need to add that to the slide. So that's one of the really exciting things. We will have to wait for government guidance on spectators, but as of now, spectators will not be allowed. I repeat, spectators will not be allowed as of now, unless the government guidance changes. One thing is for sure, looking for the 2020-21 season, it'll be great to get some of the London Cup dates in place as soon as possible so everyone can plan. If anyone does know of when their league date will start and you are privy to that information, if you could just put that in the chat, that'll be fantastic. And then I will ensure that the 2020-21 round dates are done so everyone can start to prepare for the new season. I know lockdown's been difficult for everyone, but it's good that it seems as if we're able to overcome this hurdle and get the new season going. So I'm really happy for all the cup finalist teams. They get their big day out. I mean, it'll be slightly bizarre circumstances. Obviously, I have to have similar circumstances to what the Willerton Eltham League and Michael Cole has mentioned. We will have to ensure that, players arrive at the match changed. Everyone will have to be subject to sanitizing their hands on arrival and wiping down surfaces and equipment. It's football as we know it just won't be the same for a little while, but it's a very, very small sacrifice for the cup finalist clubs to get their big day out. So if anyone has any questions in regards to the cup finals or the 2020-21 London Cups, either unmute yourself and ask now, or feel free to put the question in the chat and I'll get a response to you ASAP.
Okay, thanks, Jamal. There's no questions for the moment, no hands up, so we'll see if there's any by the end. And I'd now like to hand over to Jake Rosewell, who's going to take you through the safeguarding responsibilities in open age teams. Thank you, Jake.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is well. What I'm going to go through, or will we skip this section? What I'm going to go through.
Yeah, we've skipped Paul. We'll come back to Paul at the end if that's okay, Paul.
Sorry, absolutely Paul. Fine, Amanda. No problem.
Sorry, Paul.
what I'm quickly going to go through for you guys is just some changes in open age adult football safeguarding responsibilities. It is very brief. What I would ask is when these slides get sent out, just have a read through, click on the hyperlinks that are in there, and just familiarise yourself again with the information. By all means, any questions, stick them in the chat and I can answer them as we go through. Next slide, please, Amanda. So just in simple terms for everyone, the changes that have come into play will come into effect from this season. However, there will be no sanctions put out there until next season for not complying with this. We're using this as a education piece to help get clubs ready for when it comes in officially as of the 21-22 season. So it's now going to be that every club or team that has 16 or 17-year-old players have a duty of care to safeguard those players. I'll go into that in a bit more detail on the next slide. If we can have that one, please, Amanda. So what you can see in front of you there are the steps that the clubs in your leagues will be expected to undertake. So they'll be able to adopt and adhere to the affiliated football safeguarding children policy. For those of you that have got youth leagues, it is the same policy as well for the youth and the open age. So it will be important that the teams that have got 16 and 17-year-old players identify the players that and provide them with the assistance that is required and give them the support. Part of that will be getting DBSs for the coaches, managers and anyone with a regulated role for those teams. That does include training, not just matches. If there is a likelihood they're going to be training, then the coach manager does require a DBS. I know obviously there may be some teams that will say, right, well, we won't just have 16, 17-year-old players. That's not what we want. We want to try and keep them in the football and get them involved in adult football. So we're going to help with the DBSs and get them through as best as we and quickly as we possibly can. So at the bottom there, it's important that they're aware of the safeguarding information and the Know Your Rights in Football leaflet. That's something that the clubs will be expected to have for the players, and they can disseminate that. They can put that on their website, social media channels, and just be available to access. Just a point on the DBS. The DBS process is going to be changing from applying through GBG on the internet. It's going to be going through the whole game system. My colleague Markel is doing some work at the moment on getting some videos together to publicise that, and they will go out to everybody shortly. Next slide, please, Amanda. So these are just some questions and information that have been already put to the FA and questions that have been put to us that kind of clear up a lot of queries we get. So if the team, although this is aimed at possibly higher standard, does have a specific physio, doctor or first aider, they will be required to have a DBS check as it's a regulated role. And as it says below there, this is inclusive of all coaches and managers and assistants. They will all be expected to have the enhanced FA DBS check done prior to the 16, 17-year-old player playing. Next slide, please, Amanda. So one important point to highlight is this is regardless of the numbers of under 18 players, if they have one player playing or 16, 17-year-old player playing or training, the coach must have the DBS check done. A lot of people have asked the bottom question about committee members and having them DBS checked. That isn't a requirement unless they hold another role, such as the CWO for the adult teams. I'll come on to the welfare officer at the end, just as a little point on that. Next slide, please. So very simply, the most important points probably are it's a £10 fee to have the check done, and it will be valid for 3 years. So once they get that done, 3 years, they will not have to do it again. A lot of times, this has been the major query that we've had is how much is it going to cost me and how long will it be valid for? So next slide, please, Amanda. Just the point on the welfare officers. This isn't a requirement that's going to be coming into play for some time. We are yet to have a date on when this will come into play and will be sanctioned, but this is something that we're looking to push alongside the DBS side of it. This is very much just to prepare for any future changes that are likely to come. We'd rather assist clubs now and get people ready for when this does happen, so there's less of a transition and less of a rush. Another query we get is for clubs that have youth teams and adult teams, can we have the same welfare officer? The answer is yes, you can, but we'd advise against that due to the possible workload that may come from that. It's better to have one for the adult teams and one for the youth teams, but obviously that's dependent on how many teams each club has. And the final slide, please, Amanda. So just to round off, if there's any queries safeguarding related, you can contact myself or Nikita via our email addresses on there, or safeguarding@londonfa.com is our shared mailbox, which is monitored throughout the week. Also, there's a link there at the bottom to the safeguarding section on our website. All the information for OpenAge and any safeguarding related queries is on the website there. So do have a little look there, and if you can't find the answer that you need, then just drop us a line and we can get back to you. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll pass back to Paul, I imagine.
Great, thanks, Jake. Yeah, there's no questions so far in the chat and there's no hands up. So let's just quickly go back to Paul. Sorry about that, Paul. Here we go. There we go, there's your slide.
It's a short update, so was probably most relevant for the end, to be honest. So I think just a quick bit on coach education, because there's a few changes playing out at the FA there, and I think what I've explained to the clubs and leagues so far. So I mean, it's fairly well documented about the financial challenges for all of us, you know, kind of whether you're a club or not, and the FA aren't immune to that. So they are going through a pretty major transformation as an organisation, and probably one of the biggest changes is actually in their coach education department. Now they're moving very quickly to a much more efficient kind of digital delivery model. So that means the likes of the level 1 and the likes of some of the workshops, safeguarding first aid, will become online only, very interactive, very involved, but online programs only. And there's obviously a significant amount of benefits to them moving down that direction. Now they're also centralising that coach education roles. Previously with the county FAs, will be taking on much more of a coach development role, and the new courses are looking to be rolled out in the first half of 2021, so ideally around the very beginning of March. Now at the moment, the course programme that we've been running remains postponed. It will shift to this digital programme in the new year, and there's a bit of time the FA need to build that platform. We are hoping to be able to run some courses up to Christmas before then, but we're just waiting for some guidance from the FA on what that looks like. So just like the guidance they've put out for refereeing and for the rest of the game, they will be doing the same for the running of the course programme. It does need to fit with essentially the learning sector and some of the guidance that's been provided around COVID-19 for the learning sector, which is quite extensive. And when that guidance comes out, we are going to have to look at the viability of running it, because there might be some financial risk to us. We will keep everybody updated as we go along. For now, the really important message is unfortunately we are postponing those courses. And as I say, as soon as we've got a little bit more information, we'll be providing people for that. So that's the very quick update, Amanda. And again, of course, if anyone's got any queries on that, very happy to take it.
Great, thanks, Paul. Let's just skip through to the end. I don't think there are any more questions, so I've not had many questions today, but if you do have any questions, you can always follow up with us later. Just like to say thanks to everybody for your time and for your feedback. We'll circulate all these slides to everyone who's attended, along with a little feedback survey. It would be great to get your input to help shape our future forums. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.